What's going on, guys? Wei Koh from Revolution here at the Hourglass in Singapore, and I have the great pleasure of actually handling and looking at all of the Only watches for this year. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about Only Watch, right? So Only Watch was created in 2005 by my friend Luke Pedavino, and it raises money for muscular dystrophy. And I think that one of the conversations we're all having after COVID is like, every luxury watch brand, every major group in the world kind of needs to get behind some sort of altruistic or some kind of humanitarian effort. We've seen so many brands do that, but at the same time, when I look at this beautiful array of watches and when I look at the display downstairs, I see that there are some very significant brands that are missing also, right? And my only statement that I would like to make is like, I would urge those brands or those groups to please feel free to participate, because we all need to make a little bit of an effort to try to make the world a better place, all right? For us in Revolution as well, we've got a charity auction called the Pink Dial Project, and that raises money for breast cancer research, prevention, and cure. And honestly, we were super inspired by Only Watch and by my friend Luke. So without further ado, let's kind of get to the watches. So guys, the first three watches I want to talk about are the watches that I think of that comprise the most technically brilliant achievements for this year. In no specific order, they are the Kind of Magic, which is a collaboration between Kari Voutilainen and my friend Denis Flageolet from De Bethune. It is the FP Journe watch, the FFC's Francis Ford Coppola watch, and of course Recep Rexepi's CC2, which is an incredible dead seconds chronometer with an all-new system for creating the dead seconds mechanism. All right, so let's get started with the FP Journe watch. So this is the Francis Ford Coppola watch. It is also considered to be a blue watch, meaning that it has a tantalum case. But what's really interesting about this watch is it came about from a conversation between Francis Ford Coppola and François-Peyrot Journe when he went to go visit Mr. Coppola at his residence. And Coppola proposed to him, would it be possible to create a watch that told time with a human hand? In fact, Francis Ford Coppola was so obsessed with this idea that he went away and actually sketched out a way in which you interpret time using just one hand. So I'm now going to use my hand to show you how that works. So that's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5, that's 6, that's 7, that's 8, that's 9, that's 10, that's 11, and that's 12, which I think is kind of the international symbol for hang loose, or I think maybe that's it. But anyway, so that's the way in which you tell time with this incredible watch, which is a miniaturized automaton using a tiny hand, which is modeled after a hand created by Ambroise Paré, which was a very famous physician and medical illustrator as well. It's a really incredible timepiece in that it's an all-new system for telling the time. What's really cool also is it celebrates the 20th anniversary of the FP Journe Octa movement, which is his in-house automatic movement, which you see here. So that is an incredible watch, and I think it's the watch that's been kind of garnering the most sort of like mind-blowing praise and support. And, you know, real kudos to François-Peyrot Journe and to Mr. Coppola for this incredible achievement. So the second watch I want to talk about is an incredible watch called Kind of Magic, which is a collaboration between my friends Kari Voutilainen and the incredible Denis Flageolet. So this watch is interesting because both Kari Voutilainen and Denis Flageolet had the same mentor at Parmigiani Fleurieu when they both worked there. His name was Charles Mélon, and according to both of them, they said he taught them an incredible amount about horlogerie, about practices, about finishing, and about, you know, sort of a technical innovation as well. So as you guys may have seen earlier this year, there was already a watch that was double-faced from De Bethune called Kind of 2. But when Denis Flageolet started thinking about the incredible structure of this watch and the fact that you have the capacity to switch between two faces of this watch, he thought, why don't I approach Kari Voutilainen and see if we could do a watch together? So I'm going to start with this side of the watch, which I consider to be the Denis Flageolet side of the watch as well, because it's all about the movement. And here you see these incredible bridges, which are skeletonized, and incidentally, everything at De Bethune is made completely in-house. As I was saying, these incredible bridges that are skeletonized, you see this beautiful gold wheel with a pallet fork as well, which is controlling the watch's dead seconds mechanism. You see the in-house balance wheel, which is made of titanium with white gold screws. You see the proprietary hairspring as well, which has got a completely unique terminal cove that Denis Flageolet created as well. And on this side, because the movement is so stellar and such a beautiful expression of Denis Flageolet's magic, what you would not want to do is cover this with a dial, because you want to be able to see the movement. So here Denis Flageolet has done something very, very interesting. He's taken the minutes and he's put it at the perimeter on the form of a ring, which rotates around the dial. And then coaxial with the balance wheel, he's created a little arrow-shaped indication that has these really cool ruby rollers, and that rotates around showing you the hours as well, which is fantastic. But then you can rotate the watch And here you have the Carré Voutilanen side of the watch, which you see has this stunning guilloché en main dial. And I had the opportunity to go to the Chapeau Napoleon, which used to be a fondue restaurant on top of this big ass hill in Fleurier, but now that's where he is operating and has set up his incredible workshop where he's making these amazing dials. It's a guilloché en main dial, meaning someone's using a Rose engine machine, a vintage one, to trace this pattern from a large pattern into a tiny one with perfect execution. And here you have the Carré Voutilanen design language. And you can also see the dead seconds mechanism super well because you've got a large central seconds hand. The entire case of this watch, grade 5 titanium, so it's super light to wear. And to me, this is probably these two watches are the biggest rock stars of the show. That having been said, this is a watch that everyone's been anticipating, and it was really cool because Recep Recep was teasing this watch with just drawings of the dead seconds mechanism. It was a star and flirt mechanism, and when we see the actual watch here, we see that it's an absolutely stunning piece. Actually, before we get into the mechanics of this watch, let's talk about the case. And this case is made by one of the greatest legends of the watch industry, Jean-Pierre Hagman, right? And Jean-Pierre Hagman, if the name sounds familiar to you, is also the guy who created a lot of the cases for Patek's minute repeaters, but he's created so many different cases, and this is during a period where he was actually hand-making these cases before the era of CNC machining. So what's really cool about this watch is yes, you have a dead seconds mechanism, but you have a completely different way of operating in that you've got two barrels, two independent gear trains, one for timekeeping and the other which is geared to the dead seconds mechanism with the star and flirt. Because it can only advance when you're releasing power to power the dead seconds mechanism. These two are in fact engaged together, right? But as a result, you have a dead seconds mechanism that loses a lot less power. And I think that's really interesting, right? The watch is absolutely stunning. And of course, it's going to precede what I would imagine will be the CC2 general release, which will probably be one of the hardest watches to get, but it's absolutely stunning. So guys, thank you so much for listening to me walk you through what I think are the technical highlights of the show. Let's go from that to some of the artistic highlights of the show. So two of the watches that I think are incredible artistic expressions of time are the MB&F Panda and the incredible Moser Streamliner with a cylindrical hairspring and tourbillon. But let's start maybe with the MB&F. And as you guys know, Max Buser is one of my favorite watchmakers. I love the fact that he creates watches that are technically innovative, but are also incredibly artistic expressions of time and also make us kind of dream of our childhood or of science fiction or of the future. And he's certainly done that here with this incredible watch that he calls the Panda. The Panda, and you know he has an obsession with pandas. I believe back in 2011, he created a HM4 that had a panda riding on top of it, which I thought was absolutely stunning. And if I'm not mistaken, he said that his childhood teddy bear was a panda, which I think is really cool, right? I love the fact that he's embraced Asian culture in that way. But this watch is ostensibly based on the Bulldog, which was launched last year. But what I really love about it is it's been completely transformed as a pièce unique to really look like a panda. So here you have the ears of the panda, you even have the tail of the panda here. You've got these two crowns that act as the back legs, and then you've got the jaws of the panda, which are in fact the jaws of the Bulldog. But it's become a herbivore because pandas only eat grass and bamboo shoots, apparently. It's one of these watches that I absolutely adore, and I also have to say kudos to Max for employing a Li Yen Rapati or 1 hour watch to do all the illustrations related to this watch. It's an absolutely magical timepiece, and I can only imagine whoever's going to get it for the future is going to be incredibly delighted. So one of the other cool things that came about last year as well was a collaboration between MB&F and one of my favorite brands, H. Moser, headed by my buddy Edward Mélin. And between the cross-pollination between Moser and MB&F, they created a watch that was really cool, right? It was a watch that had a 40-degree inclined sapphire time display complemented by a tourbillon with a cylindrical hairspring. That watch was initially in a round case, but this year, Edward Mélin has brought that movement back, but he's put it inside one of his best-selling cases and one of the most desirable watches around, which is the Streamliner case, which is what you see here. It's so dope, in fact, that I want to try it on. So what I love about this is the integration of this incredible movement and this time display into the Streamliner platform, right? You have a Vanta black dial, which is the most absolute black that you have. And then you've got this dome sapphire, which gives you the opportunity to read time on a 40-degree sapphire disc here. And then you've got this sort of tourbillon that's elevated out of the dial, which has a cylindrical hairspring. While maybe this hasn't been the most talked about piece, this is to me one of the killers of the show, and I absolutely adore it. So two of the watches that I really like from Only Watch this year are created in forged carbon. And the first one is the Jira Parago Casket, made in collaboration with my buddy George Bamford. So what is the Casquette? It was a watch that was created in 1976 and actually only was made from 76 to 78. It was made in 3 versions in steel, it was made in gold-plated steel, and it was made in also a black polymer that was had a base of fiberglass. And I think it was that model in particular, the black watch, that gave the inspiration to this particular piece, which is incredible, right? So the Casquette Casket was a completely groundbreaking design. If you look at it here, it's got this kind of hooded structure to it, and then you see time displayed in LED here in this red screen. And you can see the time that's being displayed right here. But what I really love about that is that George and Jira Parago decided to bring this icon back, but now put it in a really contemporary material, which is forged carbon fiber. Other than that, the iconography of the watch is actually really faithful for the original watch in 1978. It's got a very similar looking LED display. And I think the proportion, size, and even the fit of the watch is very similar too. And the placement of the logo, the GP logo on the top here, is pretty much similar to the watches back in 1976. I love this also, but it also kind of makes me think that they've spent the R&D to create this incredible one-off piece. Potentially there might be a Casket general release in the future, but who knows? Let's see. So let's go from that to one of the most iconic watches around, which is the TAG Heuer Monaco. But what I really love about this watch, which is based on a model that was blacked out called the Dark Lord, and which is incidentally a model that even TAG Heuer historians are not completely sure of its origin, is that this watch has been executed completely in forged carbon fiber. When I say forged carbon fiber, that pertains to the case, that pertains to the skeletonized dial, and when you look at it, and this is incidentally the largest sapphire case back that's ever been fitted to a Monaco. If you look at the balance wheel, you'll see that this H02 movement, chronograph movement, has a hairspring made of carbon fiber as well. This was a technology that Guy Semon was working on at TAG Heuer for a really long time, but I love the fact that they put it into this watch. And I know that you do have carbon fiber in the H02 tourbillon version, but it's really cool to see it in a Monaco, all right? The last thing that I really love about this watch is that you've got a leather strap here, but it's been textured in a way to kind of like echo the form of the Monaco bracelet in metal. What an incredible watch, and you know, if TAG Heuer were to make a version of this for the future, I think they'd have an absolute killer on their hands. So let's go from there to two watches that I think are, from an artistic perspective, really, really cool. The first one is the Bell & Ross Cyber Skull, executed here in sapphire crystal, right? So the skull motif has been something that Bell & Ross has used in a lot of their watches in their B01. It comes from like the airborne emblems that they really like associated with the military. So earlier this year, they came out with a ceramic version of this watch, and this time they've made a one-off piece in sapphire. And when I say sapphire, it's sapphire for the case, which is made in 3 parts of sapphire, and sapphire also for the skull, which is made in 6 parts of sapphire crystal, and which has been metallized in this orange color, which is the color of the only watch auction. It's an absolutely stunning piece. I just think it's incredible on the wrist. And I like also the fact that all the screws in the crown are also executed in grade 5 titanium. Absolutely beautiful. The next watch I want to talk about is the Ullwerk UR102. This watch was created in 1998, 1 year after the brand was launched. In 1997, they created the UR101, and that watch was really groundbreaking in that it was a super contemporary sci-fi looking watch, modeled after the Millennium Falcon, if I'm not mistaken. And what I loved about it, it was the first use of their kind of wandering hour display, which created the genetic blueprint for all the Ullwerk watches that would come after. Of course, they would go into 3-dimensional displays of time. Of course, they would go into retrograde indicators, but it was, you know, really the foundation stone of Ullwerk. The next year, they created this watch, which is the UR102, and as opposed to the Millennium Falcon, this watch was actually modeled after the Soviet satellite Sputnik. And it's interesting also because there's 2 versions of this watch. So there's a version of this watch that has 4 vertical thin lugs, and then there's also a more traditional lug version of this watch as well. It's got a aluminum front, and it's got a platinum back here. And in the back, you see a lacquered representation of the Gaia Prize, which is the Gaia Prize that they won in 2020. A really beautiful part of the history of this of Ullwerk, and now with a sort of beautiful, distinct emblem that makes it completely unique. 3 more watches that I think we have to talk about, all of which are incredibly cool. So the first one I want to talk about is the Bulgari Octofenismo Perpetual Calendar, executed in a unique piece in tantalum. So I always feel kind of bad for the guys at AP, because they spent 5 years developing the RD2, which at the time was the world's thinnest perpetual calendar, which was 6.3 mm in thickness. And then like just a year or 2 later, like, you know, Bulgari comes up with their perpetual calendar, which kind of blows it out of the water at 5.3 mm in thickness. But nonetheless, big respect to AP for creating that watch. And incidentally, if you want to allocate me one, I'm totally happy with that. However, this watch is just extraordinary in terms of its thinness. The movement of the watch is only 2.7 mm in thickness. The entire watch has this great dynamic contrast between this muscular presence on the wrist when you're viewing it from the front, and this extraordinary sort of almost like optical illusion like elegance because of its thinness from the side. What I also really like about this watch, which my friend Fabrizio Buonamassa designed, was the display of the double retrograde indications. So of course, the irony with a perpetual calendar is when you get old enough to afford a perpetual calendar is the time where you can no longer read a perpetual calendar because you're going to need bifocals, and this is certainly true for me. But Fabrizio Buonamassa got around this by creating a huge retrograde date display, which surrounds the Bulgari signature, and it's actually super visible even to a super old guy like me. Then you have the days of the week on the bottom left, and then the months on the bottom right, and then you've got a leap year, retrograded leap year indication on the bottom as well. This watch is absolutely stunning. It's the only piece that's been executed in tantalum, and will be the only piece that's executed in tantalum. So absolutely brilliant watch as well. So this brings me to another watch that I think is really cool. This is the Tudor Black Bay GMT1. And as you can see, there's something funky going on with this watch, and that's because it's been intentionally aged. So what they did first was they black coated the entire watch, and then through a process of removing material through various aging processes, they made it look like it's been around for like 50 years. They continued this whole aging effect with a bezel that's also been sort of aged as well, and with a dial that has this very aggressive kind of like micro sandblasted pattern to it as well. The entire effect of this watch is something that looks like it was, you've unearthed from the ground and pulled out. But it's got obviously all the iconography of Tudor that we love so much. It's actually kind of funny. I think one of the reasons why everyone loves this watch so much is it reminds everyone of the original 6542, which was the very first GMT watch that Rolex ever produced. It's got no crown guards like that. It's got a big crown just like that watch as well. It's got that very pure kind of iconography. And that it has now been executed in a one-off piece means it's going to be a real unicorn for the lucky owner of the future. So everyone that knows me knows I'm a big fan of Chopart's Alpine Eagle, and I especially like the Alpine Eagle XL chronograph because I think it's got one of the most amazing movements as well as one of the coolest designs around. So let's talk about the movement of this watch first. This movement in this watch is automatic. It has a column wheel. It's a vertical clutch, so you can keep it running as long as you want. It's got a precise jumping minute counter, which is insane, incidentally, and it's a flyback as well. But this execution is unique. It's got a bead blasted steel case, and then it's got a dial made from granite from a part of Switzerland called Graubünden. If you live in Graubünden and I'm mispronouncing that, my apologies, but I think that that's it. And it's got this wonderful sort of multi-hued color to it, which kind of reminds me of just like, the colors of Switzerland, the colors of the lake, the colors of the mountains, all kind of in this one amazing watch. It's also nice because it's the first Alpine Eagle which has been executed with a strap as opposed to a bracelet, and I have to say on the wrist it's super, super easy to wear. And this just goes to show you, I think, some of the options that are being released in the future for the Alpine Eagle, but absolutely stunning watch. So the last watch I want to talk about is a watch made by my friend Etienne Malek of Baltic. And as you guys know, Baltic was one of my favorite brands. Why do I like Baltic so much? It's because Etienne wanted to create watches that are really reflective of the taste of customers today. He wanted to create chronographs that were really inspired by the golden age of the 30s and the 40s. And he's just released, of course, his micro rotor watch, which I tried to buy, but of course when I went there, because we released it like in European time as opposed to Asian time, they were all sold. But here is the very first Baltic that actually features a Swiss movement, and the movement that it features is a Venus Caliber 150, a legendary column wheel manual wind movement, which he actually took from a pocket watch and placed into this timepiece as well. It's got a stunning dial, guys. I mean, absolutely amazing. And what I love about it is Breguet numerals, applied Breguet numerals, which are always the type of numerals that when you find them in the reference 130 or the 1463 Tassi Tondi, elevate the value of those vintage Patek chronographs at 100 to 200%. This execution of this dial, which I think is the first super glossy dial he's done in a chronograph, is absolutely stunning. It's got a pulsometer as well, which is good because if you own this watch, you can actually take your pulse and to see your heart rate accelerate as you're wearing it. But it's absolutely stunning. And this Venus caliber looks perfect in this watch. And I hope, it would be really cool one day that Etienne is able to make these type of chronographs with Swiss movements for his own brand. But of course, I've reserved the biggest and most anticipated watch here, and it's actually the physically biggest watch as well, for last. And this is in fact the Patek Philippe contribution to Only Watch for 2021. But before we get into this watch, let's talk a little bit about Patek Philippe and its history with Only Watch, right? Because in 2019, which was the last Only Watch, it created a steel Grandmaster chime, which is their Grand-Saconnex, and that watch went for 31 million Swiss francs, right? And 31 million Swiss francs, incidentally, I think makes it the most valuable watch ever auctioned. 2 years previous Previous to that, Patek created a stunning titanium 5208, which went for 6.2 million. And if you think about it from the 2017 only watch perspective, the entire amount of money was raised was 10.7 million, thereabouts, and Patek contributed 6.2 million of that. So it goes to show you how hotly anticipated the Patek releases are, and it goes to show you how important and significant it is to only watch. And again, Theory Stern, huge, bravo to you. Thank you so much for your collaboration to only watch, and it's an incredibly kind and human gesture on your part. So this year, we're looking not at a wristwatch, but at a table clock, and it's inspired by a table clock that was delivered to the legendary American collector James Packard Ward back in 1923. And it's actually interesting, if you watch the video, you'll see the original clock next to the one that Patek has created. And I have to say that this new one, which is codenamed the Only One, is probably even more beautiful. It's got a silver case, it's inlaid with American walnut. It has details in vermeil, which is a fancy way of saying silver that's been plated with gold. And it's got a dead seconds mechanism, a perpetual calendar, and a weeks of the year display, and a salmon dial, which I also love. The watch is absolutely stunning. I also love this enormous seconds hand that you can see the dead seconds mechanism advancing precisely on each second. And if I'm not mistaken, the James Packard Ward watch was not a dead seconds watch, so this is technically even more innovative. It's absolutely stunning. I love it. I know it's going to probably be one of the most hotly, if not the most hotly contested lot here, but all of these watches are amazing. And I have to say to everyone that contributed to Only Watch, guys, I admire you as human beings. I admire your altruism. I admire your humanitarianism, and thank you for just being awesome. That's it, guys. Peace.